Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. I'm Gunner Eos. I am here with the small but mighty crew today. I've got Mr. Blankakong and Mr. HadoWolf. Mr. Esoteric and Zeta Kaiser are not joining us for this one, but they will definitely be back. Don't you fret. But today's episode of the Logical Gamers podcast is going to be New Game Plus. We're going to cover a little bit of everything. We're going to cover the concept of it. We're going to give our feelings about it, maybe some examples on ones we think did good, the concept good, did the concept not so good. But yeah, New Game Plus. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, new game New Game Plus is exactly what it is. You start a new game after you beat your first run of a game, but they allow you to carry various things over. Differs from game to game. Some let you carry character levels, some let you carry gear, some let you carry progress that you made in like a storyline, some let you carry all three. Each game varies. Some games, allow some things, not other things. But I guess I'll start off by giving my opinions on New Game Plus. I tend to, coming from a guy who plays a lot of RPGs, I tend to like the concept of New Game Plus because it just breathes more life into a game that I know I like because I beat it. I don't see New Game Plus until I've beaten the game. So I know I like the game because I beat it. And it allows me to go back into the world immediately after I finish the game and try it. But now I have all my stuff, right? I got all my levels, my gear, my special abilities, all that stuff. So I just, you know, I can try new strategies that I didn't think of doing before, or I can just bust out my busted builds, my busted characters, and just sweep the game, right? And I like that as a guy who like is really heavy into theory crafting and stat analyzing and team building. Like I love doing that. I love finally taking my team and confronting a situation that might have given me trouble in the past, but like let's see how it goes with this broken build that I have. So I'm a pretty big fan of it. I kind of like it. It gives life to games that I want to keep playing. So we're gonna kind of go around the group here, and we're gonna see my fellow podcasters' take on it. And we'll start with Wolf. What do you feel about New Game Plus?
For me, I think New Game Plus is I won't say it's necessary, but it's something I always welcome. Like I personally feel like New Game Plus does bring an additional plate to the table, I guess, or like a second entree to
Hmm.
dinner. Um, I've but to me also I've also seen New Game Plus not be what I consider New Game Plus. Like I've played games where the New Game Plus is just starting the game again. Um,
Ah, okay.
right, like that to me is not just New Game Plus. Like you need a little bit more than that. Um, or it doesn't even have to be. It doesn't even have to be New Game Plus. It can also be just like continue on this, the game itself, but there's more to do. Um, as long as as long as you give me things to do after I beat the story, I'm content, and I'm more able to enjoy and definitely see the fruits of my labor from playing through that story. So for me, New Game Plus is always a healthy welcome if it's done right, because I've seen it done bad
Right,
plenty
right.
times. Yeah. But
Hmm.
and then the games that don't have New Game Plus, they have to bring something replayable within the game for me to really say, okay, I enjoyed it. If it doesn't, then those are games that I really just tend to forget or don't remember.
Yeah, I agree. Like if a lot of games don't have like a New Game Plus that's enjoyable or a post game,
Yeah, post
then
game. Mm-hmm.
yeah, then it's just kind of like a one and done. Like you've seen the story, you've seen its conclusion, and you just kind of move on. So I agree. Like post game's another aspect, different from New Game Plus, but another aspect that if you have like a good post game or a solid New Game Plus, then I tend to be all over that. And it's going to get me to put another X number of hours into your game.
Oh yeah, definitely,
Yeah, for
definitely.
sure.
Blanca, what do you feel?
So I did a little research on New Game Plus because the only game that I've really experienced that has New Game Plus is Dark Souls, or the Dark Souls games. And in my research, I found that that's kind of a JRPG thing, New Game Plus.
Mhm.
It's not really
Yeah.
found in other games. Although you could argue that it does exist in other games that I have played, like Resident Evil, but it was never like, I just thought that was just a Resident Evil thing to me. It was just, okay, you just can play the game again, but this time you get to keep your assault rifle and your shotgun and all that stuff. So I've played other games with it, but it wasn't like a common term that I understood. It was just kind of like an expectation for games like that, I guess, if that makes sense. Now, what do I think of it? I think it's fine. Like, I'm not against New Game Plus. I don't see why anybody would be against New Game Plus. It's just a new way to play the game. And there are games that definitely do it that I feel don't encompass like what New Game Plus means. New Game Plus is New Game Plus. The plus has to mean something. So the plus right is you keeping your gear, your levels, your characters, your spells, your whatever, in order to tackle the game again, maybe in a more challenging fashion, or just tackling the game with this arsenal of tools that you typically wouldn't have access to at that point through a normal playthrough. And New Game Plus is totally optional, right? Like, you don't have to do it, right?
Right.
So, I think that anybody who feels like for some reason, oh, New Game Plus shouldn't exist, it's stupid. That's fine. You don't have to engage in it, right? But that might be asking too much of some people, I guess. But anyway, New Game Plus was officially coined New Game Plus in a game I have not played, but I know is a big hit amongst this group. The 1995 role-playing video game Chrono Trigger. That was the first game to use the term New Game Plus. But it was not the first game to feature that feature. Some of the earlier titles would be Digital Devil Story, Megami Tensei, The Legend of Zelda, the first one, Ghosts and Goblins, and Super Mario Brothers. So they're definitely, like, this has been a concept that has existed for a long time. And some people might ask, like, well, what the fuck does New Game Plus mean for Super Mario? And all it means is you get to carry your lives over, pretty much. But that's
because I was asking the same thing.
Because I looked into it, I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, there's no gear levels in Mario. But if you have 99 lives, you beat the game, you could start the game over with 99 lives, which you couldn't do if you just bought it and started a new game. So there's that, I guess, right? So it's kind of like a really I don't want to say primitive way of New Game Plus, but that's the best word I can come up with. It's a very primitive form of New Game Plus. So it's something that's existed for a long time. And again, I enjoy it, but it depends on the game. So I think there are some games, and this is going to vary from person to person, there are games that are more replayable than others. And so a game that I really enjoyed and I had a great time with, but I will probably never play again, at least not for a very long time, is Ghost of Tsushima. Now, that game was fantastic. It was my personal game of the year for 2020. And it's a game that I can easily see myself giving it a 10. Definitely a 9, but maybe even a 10. I'd have to think about that more. But it's something that I don't know if I'd play again from the beginning. Even if there was, like, I don't remember if it features a New Game Plus. I think it does. Or I think it has like
does.
I think it has a post game where like you can kind of pick up where you left off. It definitely does. It definitely does. Because I remember the cutscene at the end. We have like your own like new house or whatever, your new life. And you're encouraged to play more. But like I felt like, okay, I beat the game. Like I could play more, but like the motive isn't there anymore for me. So that's a game I can't necessarily replay again. But something like the Souls games, where you can try different weapons and try different builds. Like there's like obvious different paths you can take, and there's a difficulty spike. It feels like there's more to gain. Like there's something here for me. Whereas in Ghost of Tsushima, it's like the same stuff, but now you get to keep all your ninjutsu moves and stuff, and it's like, oh, that's kind of cool, but that for me that'll get old quick. Or a game like Resident Evil, where it's something about the Resident Evil formula that makes those games really easy to replay again. Like there's a sense of mastery in Resident Evil where the first time you play a Resident Evil game, you'll spend, let's say, 12 hours playing this game, but for some reason the second playthrough, because now you know all the puzzle solutions, you know the locations of certain items, you cut that 12-hour playthrough to 5 hours, right? And for some reason there's something fun about kind of running through the game. And then if you play it like a third or fourth time, now it's like, okay, we'll beat the game in 2 hours, right? And you're able to do it because like you have more knowledge, you're able to just perform better and execute the game's challenges at a higher level, and there's something satisfying about that. I don't really understand why that is with Resident Evil, but it exists. And maybe somebody out there who's smarter than me can break it down and explain it better than I could ever, but it's something I definitely feel with Resident Evil games or games like it. And I feel like it's kind of the same with the Souls games, where it's like there's an enjoyment in kind of revisiting the game. I'd have to think about it more. I did think about this topic yesterday and today, and I couldn't really pin it down as to why New Game Plus works in certain games and not in others. Like I don't get. I maybe you guys can extrapolate based off of, because like I said, I mentioned Ghost of Tsushima, which I loved, but I can't replay it. Why? Like I don't know. What do you think?
I think for me it's the privileges that is given to you, or the advancements that you've done. So like for instance in JRPGs like the Tales of series, you just don't, when you get New Game Plus, you just don't get everything you want. Or so it's like this, every battle that you do within the first playthrough, every single battle, whether it's a regular enemy or a boss fight or whatever, you get graded on. And those grades are turned into points. So when you actually beat the game, you can spend those points on privileges that'll carry over to New Game Plus. So if, say, New Game, instead of just saying, oh, well, we'll give you all your levels, you actually have to buy your privilege to keeping your levels, or buy the privilege to keep your weapons, or buy the privilege to keep your characters. If you don't buy them when you start New Game Plus, you lose what you don't buy. Right? So I think with that, there's a more, there's a sense of control in how difficult you want your New Game Plus to be, or how you want to change the way you played from the first playthrough. You know, are you gonna pay for this character? Are you gonna pay for this character that you would have gotten 20 hours later in the game, and it's one of the characters that you used and you want to use them earlier? You know, you buy that privilege.
That sounds like that's something exclusive to the Tales games, because I've never heard of that before.
I think it is.
Yeah, that's how the Tales games do it. But that's why Tales games New Game Plus is important, or it's more enjoyable than even the first game, because you get that control in where it's like, well, how powerful or how much privilege do you want as a player? But the first playthrough is just as important, because if you understand the Tales series, you would do good in as many fights as you possibly could, so you can gain as many points by the end of the game. Yeah. So when a Tales fan plays the game, the first playthrough, it's really so that they can play the second playthrough.
Yeah, you know what? I've heard that from a lot of people. Like, the first playthrough of a Tales game is preparation for the second playthrough of a Tales game.
But this right. So with games like Ghost of Tsushima, where it's just like your New Game Plus is keeping the same ninja arts. It's like, okay, well, you like, this is what I would have gotten anyways. Like you was gonna build up to that regardless, right? Because the game was gonna give it to you, whatever you. That's just the way that the game is programmed, and your privilege is very limited. So it's just like, well, if all you keep is your ninja arts and the special stances that you unlock, that's it. Everything else is just like, okay, well, I now know I can go here faster. Everything else is just really based on what the players learned from the first playthrough, if they learned anything. And what you learned from the first playthrough isn't really going to change the dynamic of the game, right? So I make a better example. In Tales of Symphonia, you have, for instance, say you want to use the character Regal, he's like a kickboxing character, right? Say he's your favorite character. If you buy the privilege to keep him when you start New Game Plus, then what's going to happen is you'll get him earlier, and his play style may be better to use for the earlier bosses because of how he's set up. So that boss that would have given your characters in the beginning a hard time, his character base or his character archetype made the fight easier or better for you. So you feel more powerful, or you feel more rewarded on that second playthrough because you were able to get this character that, would have made it easier, faster. Ghost of Tsushima, in my opinion, with New Game Plus 2 or New Game Plus, it's just more like, well, you're powerful from the get-go, but it's like this straight road. This is it from the beginning, and this is it at the end.
Right.
There's no change in that. There's no progression. It's just, it flatlines the game. So like, if you look at a chart, the difficulty can go up or down based on how you progress. But when you do New Game Plus, you're already the OP Jin Sasaki or whatever his name is. So at that point,
yeah.
Jin Sakai, right? So by that time, it's just like, well, game, and it's not interesting. There's no change in the dynamic of the game other than you having all your moves.
Do you think a strong narrative plays a role in that? Because I think it did for me in terms of Ghost of Tsushima. Like, a lot of the motivation came from wanting to know what the story was, where the story was going to go.
I really feel like that is, yeah, I agree with that. Because even with, say, like Spider-Man for the PS4, which is the best Spider-Man game I've ever played anyways.
Agreed.
Maybe some will disagree. Okay.
I can't argue that.
I was content. I did not need to do anything else. Once I beat the story, because the story was so powerful, because the characters were well done, it was just more like, well, I don't need to collect all these nodes from the different buildings. I don't need to play Black Cat's mini games. I don't need to do any of that. I'm content. It gave me enough. The gameplay was good. The story was good. The progression was good. That's it. I'm satisfied. I'm full. And
so,
Ghost of Tsushima followed that.
Right. So would you say that you probably wouldn't want to play a New Game Plus of Spider-Man, but maybe like 3 years from now, 4 years from now, like maybe some nostalgia hits you and it's like, I'd rather do you want to do a new playthrough of Spider-Man.
Right.
Would you see yourself doing that? Okay.
I'd see myself definitely doing a new playthrough or just starting the game over again and working, because the fun of the game is a part of the fun of the game is not only discovering or going through the great story that it actually had, but is also the difficulty that the character that you had to build up with the character. If I did New Game Plus, all 30 plus of his costumes is available. All of his abilities is available. The idea of sneaking into the building, trying to pin enemies to the ceiling so you can pick them off little by little by little. All of that goes out the window. The fun of being Spider-Man goes out of the window. It's just more like, now you're like Iron Man. You'll just bust into the building and start lasering everything down, and boom, game over. It just completely changes the dynamic of what that character tried to caption when you did your first playthrough. That's the issue with Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima, it's not a tactical game, but you had to be tactical in it. You couldn't just run inside a village that's taken over by the Mongols and start slaying everything. It's an option. You could try, but chances are you were going to experience a game over, or you would have failed the objective by like them killing the hostages or something. You had to be tactical when you go in, but you can do that if you did New Game Plus easily. You know, you throw your smoke bombs, you go in, you do your triangle attack, cut the enemy throat, he'll dash over to the next one, cut that enemy throat, and then you just rinse and repeat till you go through the whole village. It's this, for some people they're gonna find that fun, some, but then for I think for others it's just gonna be more like, well, the gameplay isn't really there because it's not challenging. So really you're just watching cutscenes. And again, like I would suggest to people, if you're just gonna play a game for cutscenes, might as well just watch a YouTube video. Somebody else will do it for you. Like, don't put yourself through that.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, as you're talking about it, and you brought up Tales, the Tales series, like that added a layer of like context for me, because I keep asking myself like, okay, but why do me, Blankakong, why do I engage in New Game Plus in certain games and not in others? Specifically Resident Evil, specifically maybe Resident Evil 3 or the original, not the remake. Right? Or Resident Evil 2. That could be either the remake or the original. Or why like what about it? What is intriguing? Because okay, with Resident Evil, for the most part, when you do New Game Plus, you keep all your weapons. So you have broken ass Magnum and the assault rifle and all this extra shit, where it trivializes the beginning of the game. But I guess the more I think about it, it's the first time you play a game like that, there's a sense of fear and intimidation because it's new and you don't know, right? And so once you surpass it, the first playthrough, the second playthrough is not necessarily about like experiencing the same experience again, but more so flexing your skill. Like, I've dominated this game and now I'm gonna showcase that dominance. And I think that applies also to the Souls games, where you're already like, because there's a definite fear when playing a Souls game. Like, it's like, this game is intense, right? Or this game's gonna kick my ass. But now it's like the tables have turned. Like, now, I'm gonna kick your ass, right? Because now I know all your tricks, and now I've got all my cool gadgets from the first playthrough. So I don't know, why is that more intriguing to me in those games versus Ghost of Tsushima? Better yet, why am I more intrigued to replay Dark Souls 1 and not Dark Souls 2? What's the difference there?
I think it's the challenge. I think with because those games, like Dark Souls games specifically, are designed to keep you on your toes, that no matter how powerful you get in the Dark Souls game, it doesn't mean that you are immune to death, right? Like, the monsters are still going to hit you for the same amount of damage in New Game Plus as they would have hit you in regular, or probably harder.
For the Souls games, it's harder. Like, they're going to hit you harder. Yeah,
they're going to hit you harder. So there's that constant balance in the difficulty or the challenge of the game. So yeah, you'll get your crazy spells if you're a spellcaster, or you'll get your crazy big sword or your crazy big shield again. You'll get that back. But when you come across an enemy, it's like they normalize themselves to fit your power. So there's that challenge. And the key word which you said about the Resident Evil one was the beginning, right? So you get your rocket launcher, you get your Magnum, you get your your big guns and whatever, but it trivializes the beginning. So you're going to get to a point where you realize your power level is 9,000, but as you progress through the game, you start to feel like your power level is 7, 6, 5, 4. Like, you feel that difficulty that's rising. So all those rocket launchers that you had in the beginning, big deal by the mid game to near the end. Whereas, like, say, games like the Spider-Man game or the Ghost of Tsushima game, you get that constant training from just running into random enemies, right? So you run into a random enemies, it's like, oh, okay, I gotta fight 6 guys now. You beat them because you know how these 6 guys are gonna operate. And then you run into the village, it's like, okay, well, there's 12 guys now. you beat them because you know how these 12 guys are going to operate. And then you keep going and you keep
So
going. And you're not even at full power yet.
Would you say that the difficulty just plateaus?
Yeah, it just plateaus
at a certain point, and then never picks back up. I mean, what do you think, Gunner? Like, because you've played the Souls games, you've played Tales games, you've played Resident Evil games, so I think you would have a much more vast and like informed opinion. Because Wolf hasn't played the Souls games to completion.
Mhm.
I haven't played Tales games to completion, or any JRPG really, or many. So, like, I think you have the most diverse palette of experience.
Okay, so when it comes to New Game Plus in these different types of games, they there is a different impact that a New Game Plus is going to have. So Wolf mentioned the Tales series, and that completely slipped my mind. So, like, that's a prime example of a new game system done right. Because when he's talking about those things that you get in the grade shop, that the game calls it, not only do you choose what to buy, but in some of the newer Tales games you can toggle them, like toggles. So it's like, I want to earn double exp, you can toggle that on and then toggle it off. Like, you can literally customize your new game experience how you want it. And it's really only the Tales games that do that, and that's like a really good new game plus system, because you can kind of tailor your difficulty. So it's just like, well, I don't want double exp on, so I don't want my characters to be level 100 by the midpoint of the game, but I do want double AP on. I want my characters to learn skills, so I have my full repertoire of skills in the beginning of the game, but I'm not super over leveled and I'm dominating. So that's like
It's like control of how
right.
you're gonna control your own difficulty.
Right. Do I want a billion gold in the beginning of the game so I never have to worry about money? Well, you could turn that on, you can leave it off, or you can never buy it. So Tales is a prime example of really super tailored new game plus. Now, when we move over to games like Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, and things of that ilk, to me those are very heavily driven narrative games. Ghost of Tsushima is literally watching a Kurosawa film in motion.
Mhm.
Spider-Man is literally like binging Spider-Man comics in video game form. Like, these are heavy story focused narratives. So to me, your first experience is always going to be the
Best.
purest. Yeah, the best and the
Mhm.
purest. Like, cuz it's you're learning the skills of the game. You're being drip fed new and cool skills as you go through the game. You're experiencing the story for the first time. And these games do give you new game plus, but I think it's just at that point for the power fantasy. And while those work in certain other games like the Souls games and maybe to a lesser extent the Tales games, with those story narrative games, they don't hit as hard, because to me anyway, the super powerful feeling, that wasn't the point of those games. The games was the point of those games was a story, and then your slow upward progression in skill that matched where you were in the story. Because if I'm going to use Ghost of Tsushima as example, when you started, oh my god, you were rough. You had crappy armor, you had a basic sword, you had no skills, and as you went through the game and the story progressed and Jin changed as a character and his motives, not to spoil too much, but his motivations and his way of thinking changed, your gear match that pace in tandem. So your skills improved with Jin, your weapons improved with Jin, your armor improved with him. And when it comes to a new game plus, you lose that key aspect of it because you have Jin's best armor from the get-go. So it
Mhm.
doesn't match the seriousness of the story. And to wrap it up, when it comes to the Souls games, to me those I'm a guy who's very analytical and I like to have the best in slot build. But every time I start a new Souls game, I never do New Game Plus. And this might sound weird to you guys that know me for a while and people listening and watching, but I like to start a Souls game from the start because I like to ramp up my build. I might do research beforehand and know exactly where I'm going with the build, where the items are located, and how to get them. but I want to ramp up to it. I don't want to start at super powerful mode and then just run through the game. And this is a controversial opinion, but I think that Dark Souls 2 had the best concept for New Game Plus and how you implemented it. And I know the Souls fans are screeching, "Oh, Dark Souls 2, it's the shittiest Dark Souls. No one likes, if you like Dark Souls 2, you're bad." But no, hear me out. So with Dark Souls 2, its New Game Plus actually added things. Now you could say that's good or bad, but every time you beat the game, bosses would drop different loot. So the same boss in Dark Souls 2 would drop a sword, for example. But in New Game Plus, it would drop a ring. That's completely different loot. And you could say, "Oh, I don't want to go beat the game to just play the game again to get the +2 ring." But what Dark Souls 2 did that no other Souls game, including Elden Ring, has done is they had an item in the game called Bonfire Aesthetic. And what that allowed you to do was you took that item, it was a finite item, and you rested at a bonfire. And when you burned it, it turned that area around the bonfire into New Game Plus.
Yep.
Right. So say you killed a night boss and he dropped a sword, but in New Game Plus he drops a shield, and you want that shield for your New Game Plus playthrough. You could take a bonfire aesthetic and burn it at that bonfire. It would reset the area, and that area, including the boss, would now be New Game Plus level. So it's like they hit harder, they drop more souls, and they have more HP. But you can now get that shield from the boss. You just have to fight it at New Game Plus. And you can do that with key points in the game. And I found that so interesting because it was like kind of tapping into a New Game Plus mode while I'm still playing a first playthrough. And no other Souls game, Dark Souls 1, 3, and I don't want to spoil Elden Ring, but it hasn't. Dark Souls 2 is the only game that does that. And for as much crap as Dark Souls 2 gets, and it does have faults, it has plenty of them, I found the way they implemented New Game Plus and how you can tap into that from an initial playthrough to be the most interesting and unique concept of New Game Plus that I've ever played. So
That is
to
an
add,
interesting concept.
yeah, like it's really cool because you have to deal with the New Game Plus regardless. So say you got the shield and you ran through that area again, all the enemies are New Game Plus. So they'll fucking beat your ass, but that's the risk you take to get the different kind of loot. And I just found that very interesting.
High risk, high reward.
Super high risk, high reward.
I don't know. Like as you were talking, like I still have to think. I might have to play through Dark Souls 2 again. I might have to play through all of them again to like have a real like definite stance on why it is I like one over the other, or why New Game Plus works better for me in some games versus others. I think the best example, I think you hit it on the head when you said narrative can affect what New Game Plus feels like. Because I thought about it. So Resident Evil 3, the original, I played and beat that game like 30 times, literally. Like I'm not even exaggerating, like 30 times.
Wow.
And I mean, there's other reasons why I beat it so much because it was like the only game I had for a while, but I did enjoy it. Like I just got excited at the idea of like, oh, I get to fight Nemesis at this point of the game. Now I have like real firepower to fight him. Whereas Resident Evil 3 Remake, that game is heavily leans toward like cutscenes and narrative, and more so about the narrative than, you know, gameplay and the intensity of being chased around by Nemesis. Whereas the original 3 was more about being chased around and the gameplay. And I tried to replay Resident Evil 3 Remake for the trophies because you have to beat it in like different difficulties, and I got to the point where I was like, it felt like a chore. Like I felt like I was forcing myself to play the game, and it just didn't I don't know. Like
Didn't flow.
I hated it. I started to hate the game, and to this day I haven't booted it back up. Um, but yet if I played Resident Evil 2 remake, I can replay that game back to back. So I guess it depends on the flow of the game, and that game does have narrative points. Like there's a lot of cutscenes in it, but not as much. I guess it depends on, I don't know, the game. Like how much of it is actually enjoyable versus interactive enjoyment versus just kind of like watch enjoyment. Like I'm just gonna watch this story play out enjoyment, because there are certain TV shows that like I can watch over and over again. Like I can watch episodes of Fresh Prince over and over again, like the same episode, or episodes of Friends over and over again. But or The Office, right? A lot of people watch The Office like 1,000 times, right? And I'm one of them. But then there are other shows which I thought were very good, but are hard for me to watch again, like Game of Thrones, like or Breaking Bad, like because it's like a big part of those shows' intrigue was the surprise factor and not knowing where the narrative's going. Whereas in those sitcoms that I mentioned before, the narrative is second to the joke or to, you know, the comedy.
The idea of what's going on.
Yeah. Or the situation. So I think there's like some parallels there from like TV shows or film media to video games as to why, like, what makes a show rewatchable, what makes a game replayable. I don't know, it's a really intriguing concept, and it can change from person to person, so it's really interesting to think about and to talk about.
So, that's why I asked Wolf, like, he wouldn't immediately jump into a Spider-Man playthrough, but how would he feel after, a couple years? And I feel the same way as him. If it's a heavy narrative story game, once I beat it, I'll leave it be. Like I've beaten it, I've seen the credits, I've seen the end of the story, but then like give it a couple years, and then like something will spark in me. It's like, you know what, man? I feel like playing Ghost of Tsushima again. I feel like experiencing that story. Or I feel like playing Spider-Man again. Like I'll still remember the beats. I'm like, oh, this is when Black Cat comes. Like, oh, this is when he has this fight with Mary Jane. Like I'll still remember it, but it's just because it's been so long. It's like it's like watching a good movie again after it's been a couple years. Or reading a good book again after it's been a while. You still know the outcome, you still know the story beats, but I guess it's nostalgia. Part of it's kind of nostalgia. And it's just like, you know what? Yeah, let's relive this experience again. Even though I know how it's gonna end. Let's ride this ride again. But that's like with story narrative games because that's their focus.
Right. Like JRPGs are story narrative games, but really there's always this deep level of JRPGs that brings in a necessity for New Game Plus. So with JRPGs, it's always, well, this is what you did, and here's how you can do it better, and that's what people look forward to. How can we do it better? Like games like Spider-Man and Ghost of Tsushima, the better is how the characters are the challenges and obstacles that the characters themselves face for whatever story they're telling.
Right.
Yeah, like enemies in Spider-Man, once you get your suits and your power-ups, they are nothing. And they're enemies, whether they're beginning quote-unquote enemies or enemies that is in harder areas, it's all the same. Like you don't really feel a change in difficulty. But like say in a JRPG, the first town you start in that open area, those enemies will always be level 1. They will always be level 2. When you get to a harder area, those enemies will always be level 60. They will always be level 70. You're always going to see that change in difficulty. Because that's just the way that I feel like the way the stats are set.
Yeah.
Like these enemies are meant to be hard. Whereas I feel like for Ghost of Tsushima and Spider-Man, these enemies are there to be just programmed obstacles for your story.
Right.
I think that's why I can't. It's like reading a book and then you go back and you read it again the same night you finish it. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
impact is not the same.
There are some games that like it's designed from its concept to be immediately played again, to like literally turn around, boot it up, and get back in there. And there are games that they're like, wine, to use an analogy. They're like wine that you drink it and then you just leave it there and let it marinate for a couple years, and then when you revisit it, it's like, now I remember why I like drinking this wine so much, and
Mhm.
I'll drink it again,
Hmm.
and then you might shelve it again.
Would you like a glass of Resident Evil 1998? Or would you like some
Hey,
1997? Or would you like 2018? I think I want some 1998. Give me a nice big glass of that.
yeah,
That's
and
interesting.
Resident Evil 3 remake is box wine.
Resident Evil 3 remake, to be
Remake,
clear. 3 remake,
yeah,
not 2. 2 remake was pretty fucking great.
agreed.
So would you say that it's up to the developers and the designers and the producers to, like, if they want to include New Game Plus, it can't be like what some games do where it's like, we're gonna have multiplayer for the sake of having multiplayer, but it's not gonna have any real substance. Like, New Game Plus needs to be like almost as if it's designed to be a new game.
Yes, I
Yeah,
feel so. I feel like if you're gonna do New Game Plus, again, like you said earlier, the plus is important. I
Yeah.
need to know that when I boot this game up, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm in New Game Plus. Like, you don't get lost in that translation of, wait, hold on, let me pause the screen and check what difficulty I'm on, or go back to the loading screen and it says, sad game, New Game Plus. Like, you shouldn't have to do that to be reminded that you're in New Game Plus. So I feel like that's very important. If you're going to go that route, if you're going to go that route and add an additional layer to said content, then you got to put in the effort for the player to know or to feel like this is not only just a second playthrough, but this is an enjoyable. It's not just repetition. It's a little
right.
bit more than just repetition.
Yeah,
Like,
It,
one of my favorite franchises is Infamous. I love Infamous, especially 1 and 2. I think it's one of the best games I've ever played in my entire video game career. However, Infamous follows the same thing. It's, you play the story and you stop. That's the same thing. And it's because Infamous, much like Spider-Man and Ghost of Tsushima, which is I won't say open world, but you get to do what you want for the most
it's
part.
like a
Go where you
sandbox
want.
game.
Yeah, sandbox game. The enemies are pretty much all stagnant. It's, well, I'm now this powerful, so every single enemy, no matter what area I'm in, is this much easier. And that's because that's not really what Infamous is really. I don't feel like that's what Infamous was really for or going for. Not necessarily the difficulty of the enemies, but more so just saying like, hey, look, we got this really intricate story of a pretty cool character and we want to tell it this way. So now that I know Cole McGrath's story and how amazing of a character he is, in my personal opinion, at this point, the enemies there is now not necessarily important to me because I know this character. I understand this character. His story was told. I don't need to fight his enemies anymore. I don't need to go back and load and find all the checkpoints in the game. Like, oh, that is just, it's just like it doesn't add any new flavor to the game.
right.
With the Infamous is a little different. You can go back and do New Game Plus, the opposite side of whatever you chose. Whether if you did my first playthrough for Infamous, the first one was good. So when I went back and did the second playthrough, which I never completed because I ran into that issue, I chose bad. But while my powers were slightly different, it was ultimately still the same because I knew what was going to happen in the story. His dialogue changed a little bit, but it was still ultimately the same. Instead of it being blue lightning, it's red lightning. And this time around, it's a little more destructive. And because his bad side was so destructive, that killed the difficulty even more so. Like, he had better AoE attacks. He had more damaging
Yes, yeah, I
attacks. It
remember that.
is like at that point was just more like, well, now I'm just pushing buttons. Like, I'm not really getting anything out of it.
Feels like an empty experience.
Yeah, it becomes an empty experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are some games out there that just add New Game Plus because that's a thing that we should do. And I'm speaking from like the development teams, like, well, we should have New Game Plus, right? That's a thing people like. And not all games benefit from a New Game Plus. I mean, if it's there and someone, if someone gets another 30 hours out of the game because they immediately booted up New Game Plus, that's fine. Like, good for them. It's your amount, your 65 or 40, however much you paid. It's your game. Had fun with it. But there are some games that just feel like it has New Game Plus because that's what you're supposed to do, and they don't think about how they're going to incorporate the New Game Plus. So, like in the infamous example, you're just like bulldozing through the game. Enemies mean nothing. You're one-shotting dudes, and at that point, it's just like, I'd rather just play a new game, a fresh game, so I can at least have that build up again, because you realize it was the build up in conjunction with the story that completed the circle that is the experience. And when you take half that circle away, it's not the same.
I'll give you an example. Another one too, which I played Tales of Symphonia not 30 times like some people played Resident Evil. But I clocked in 500 plus hours in that game for multiple playthroughs. And there's this, in Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube, there's this one specific boss that if you beat him, you get an ultimate weapon. He'll drop an ultimate weapon for whatever archetype character that you have in the game. I don't know if it was controlled, and I don't remember if he drops all of them at once. I think the way it works is that you have to beat him and he'll unlock the potential of the ultimate weapon. So I think you had like 8 characters. I think there was 8 or 9 characters in the game. Each of them have an ultimate weapon. Each of their ultimate weapons is unlocked a different way, a significantly different way. But they're all extremely weak. So in order to make them the ultimate weapon of the game and how powerful they really are, you had to beat this really uberly powerful boss that's not available to you in the first playthrough. So if you play the game again, you're rewarded with being able to fight him. However, it's cleverly done because you're never really that powerful by your second playthrough to fight him anyways. So if you really want to beat him, you go through a third, a fourth, or even a fifth playthrough so that you can constantly gain those points that I was telling you about. They recycle. So you constantly gain those points to constantly make your characters more powerhouse. That you make them more stronger. You constantly recycling their power to add more power to what you recycled from the last playthrough. So maybe I fought him on I think my 6th playthrough, and I still barely could beat him. But I did. That's how powerful he was. It took 6 playthroughs for me to build the characters to beat him. And the reward of beating him after 6 playthroughs was all the enemies that I killed using the ultimate weapon in all 6 of my playthroughs added up to damage that the weapon will now give out. So those ultimate weapons, by the time I was able to beat that boss from all those fights I had in a JRPG with random battling encounters, it was one-shotting enemies or even strong bosses, quote unquote, or just burning through them in minutes. Right? But that was the fruit of the labor that I went through for multiple playthroughs. So the experience was, again, the result of what I was aiming for. My result was I wanted these ultimate weapons. I wanted to be powerful. So my journey was 6 playthroughs. Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man doesn't exactly do that.
Yeah.
It's powerful. That's it. Power level 9,000. It stays at 9,000. It will forever be 9,000, no matter how many times you go through New Game Plus. JRPGs, power level is 9,000. First playthrough goes up to 10,000. Second playthrough goes up to 11,000. You know, you're constantly always making yourself a better characters, better playthroughs, stronger scenarios, putting yourself in. You're taking away the annoyances or the difficulties or the obstacles that you face at a much slower rate, which forces you through multiple playthroughs. I think JRPGs do New Game Plus the best, which
Yeah,
I
is
can't
why
really
they
disagree.
always do it.
That's why they always do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah,
You
I think
know.
a lot of Western games, a lot of modern games have seen New Game Plus, and some of them feel like we have to put it in because that's the thing you do, and they
Yeah.
lose why New Game Plus is such a big thing in the JRPG genre, and why it's kind of why it didn't start there, but why it found its home there, and why it's best, in my opinion, best suited on RPGs as opposed to action adventure story driven games.
I mean, even bosses are unlocked from playing New Game Plus in JRPGs. Like,
Yeah,
let's go back to Spider-Man. As great as the game is, it would have been nice that if you did New Game Plus or post game, at least you get to fight one of his villains that you didn't fight during the story mode. You know, it doesn't have to be canon. It doesn't have to be a very difficult fight, but the fact that, you know, okay, so I fought the bosses in the game was Rhino, Electro, Dr. Ock, some Electric Man, Negative Man, I think his name is.
Yeah. And I think Shocker was also a mini boss
Shocker,
too.
right. It was also there. And Vulture, right?
Yeah.
Those were the real bosses that you really fought. But if post game would have thrown in Scorpion or or Mysterio, you know, like as like additional bosses for playing New Game Plus, that would have added a layer of reason to even need to play New Game Plus, even if the enemies themselves or if the difficulty itself wasn't very rewarding. You understand what I'm saying? Like those games don't
yeah,
really do that. Like there's nothing extra, no extra NPCs in any of those games. It's just literally
You know,
just
I
the game
think
from the beginning.
I think tempo also plays a factor in that. Like the game has to either be super fun to play, but also not be a fucking slog. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so for me, okay, to take it back to Resident Evil for a second, like the reason why those games have such high replayability is because realistically you can beat them in an hour. But you don't know that the first time you play because you don't know all the fucking solutions. You're discovering it, right? That's the beauty of like playing it the first time versus the 10th time, right? But because you can run through it super fast without breaking the game, without being like an official speed runner, there's something intriguing about it. It's like, well, how fast can I go? You know? But also to have like a real life analogy, it's like if you think back to like a fonder time in your childhood, let's say the 5th grade was awesome, right? If you could go back in time with your current mind into the 5th grade, that would be a slog. Like to experience the 5th grade again day by day, it would be like, dude, I don't need to be here. Like I already know this shit. Like I don't want to wake up every day and go to school, whatever, right? But if you could just go back to the highlights that made 5th grade great, then it's like, okay, well that's fine because now I don't have to go through the 365 days of what 5th grade looked like for me. I can just kind of go to the 5 days that really made that year stick out. And so I think that's kind of what New Game Plus needs to be. It needs to either give you a reason, new experiences, or it needs to like highlight the best shit and let you experience it in a different way. Like the point of New Game Plus should be plus, right? It should be different. It should be a little new. It should be the same dish but with new spices, if that makes sense.
right.
So interesting. Interesting.
New Game Plus to me is it's always the icing on the cake. It doesn't necessarily make or break a game for me, but if a New Game Plus is done right, the longevity for that game, for me, it increases dramatically. That's why Tales of Symphonia is my favorite, probably my favorite JRPG or my favorite Tales of game, period, because the amount of replayability and the story doesn't change. It's not that the story changes. It's just that the gameplay and the privileges are so vastly different for every playthrough that it feels like you're putting yourself in a new experience. Or you're building towards this one epic fight against the strongest enemy in the game to unlock the strongest weapons in the game, and that's when you're done, because that weapon is going to start one-shotting everything, right? So I definitely agree with Gunner where JRPGs definitely made New Game Plus its home, because JRPGs, at least old JRPGs, they have all these ideas and situations that they want to put you in, but they can't cram it all in the first playthrough. So it's their way of saying, okay, well, we're going to give you all of these, but just bear with us and, play through the game again. And here is your reward for playing through the game again. I think that's just a phenomenal way to increase the longevity of a game that's already like 60 plus hours to beat.
Right. Yeah.
And you're gonna go through 60 plus hours again just because you want to fight this boss that unlocks simply for beating the game. It's like,
Yep.
it is
And the
maddening.
beauty about it is that if you don't want to do that, well, you've seen the story. You've beaten the game. You can stop right there, and
Yeah,
one can
and
say
just
you won't miss anything.
you just stop and just chill. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for that insight. I did learn a thing or two, and you guys definitely kind of shined a brighter light on New Game Plus as a whole. And I learned a lot about like other games that do it extremely well. You mentioned the Tales games, like that's the whole currency system and like buying skills and buying tools, and it's toggling, and that's super intriguing. I wish more games did that in general. That'd be pretty sweet. But this was an interesting conversation. If you guys listening enjoyed it and you made it this far, leave a like on the video. We'd appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with what your opinions are on New Game Plus and any suggestions for future topics. We'd love to hear from you. We also have social medias, so Logical Gamers TV on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and we also have a Discord as well. That's all going to be linked in the description. So if you're interested in joining any of those communities, you are welcome to. We also stream on Twitch. So Mr. Esoteric, who isn't present for this particular episode, he streams on the main channel, Logical Gamers TV on Twitch. He streams every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mostly plays single-player games, AAA single-player games. So your Horizons, your Elden Rings, your Returnals, etc. That's his kind of space. And I usually stream on Blankakong on Twitch. Typically every Sunday, but not always. So I'm a little more sporadic. I play mostly retro and indie titles. So if you're interested in that content, then check me out. I did mention the podcast publishes every Wednesday at 12 p.m. If I haven't, then there it is. And we also do 2-minute reviews on the games that we play on stream. That publishes every Monday at 2 p.m. or at 12 p.m. Excuse me. Got my times mixed up. So thank you guys for a interesting conversation. We hope that anyone listening enjoyed it as well. And we'll catch you in the next one. Have a good night. Peace.
Next time.